Welcome to Reaching Minds Thoughts for Your Life's Journey. In this episode today, we will be exploring the turbulent and unpredictable nature of modern business today within the context of redundancies. Now, from research, we know that the experience of redundancy can impact us all differently, and how we navigate it in particular, if you happen to be an introverted leader or a woman. Let me say this again. From research, we know that the experience of redundancy can impact us differently, and how we navigate it, particularly if you happen to be an introverted leader from the global majority. Today, I'm joined by Carol Stewart, who is a coaching psychologist, executive career and leadership coach, and the founder of Abounding Solutions business. She specializes in introverted leaders, senior women, and leaders from the global majority, supporting them to lead with confidence, influence, and impact without abandoning who they are. Carol holds an MSc in psychology and an MSc in coaching psychology, the latter which focused on the experience of job loss through organizational change. She's also an author of Quietly Visible: Leading with Influence and Impact as an Introverted Woman, and creator of the Quietly Visible Leadership brand. Now, I could go on all the accolades that Carol has, but you can read about her. So what I'm going to do is welcome her to this podcast. Welcome, Carol.
Hello, Anita, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
Oh, I'm looking forward to this. It's an area that I think we don't talk about it, and it happens a lot. Redundancies and how we manage it in our world, because it kind of quietly goes on. And my experience has been in the past, it probably got more visibility and more listening than it's got today, but maybe I'm wrong as well. So from your observation, Carol, how has the modern business world changed within the context of redundancies?
Yeah, I think we're increasingly seeing redundancies more so than, I mean, redundancies have always happened, but I think because of how the world of work is changing or has changed and continues to change, the result of technology, AI, I think we're seeing it at an increasing pace now. I think we go through phases, if you look back over the years, where there'll be spurts of like economic downturn, which leads to redundancies. And I think that we're currently going through that at the moment.
What do you think is bringing that about in our world, really?
I think that there's the current economic climate, a lot of changes because of AI, and a lot of roles which are being lost as a result of AI. But at the same time, I don't want people to think, oh, AI is going to take my job and I'm not going to be able to do anything, because, you know, with every new wave of technology or ways of working, that new jobs arise. But it's that initial period where people are getting made redundant. And so I think the economic downturns that we have, the instability that there is globally as well, is leading to all of that.
Mm. So building on that, how do you think organizations are managing the process of redundancies or restructuring, which leads to redundancy in your experience?
I don't think a lot of organizations handle it well. Um, Legally, they may do, strategically, they may do, but psychologically, I don't think that they do. When it comes to the individuals that work within those organizations that are affected, I don't think that they handle that bit well. And how well they handle that will determine how well somebody gets through the process.
So what are they not paying attention to in the organization?
I think for many organisations, they're just looking at the numbers and not looking at the people behind the numbers and the impact that this is having on them, the emotional impact that it has on the individuals, not just whilst they're working at the organisation, but beyond, once they've left that organisation, if it hasn't been handled well in terms of from the emotional aspect, that can have negative consequences for that individual for years to come. Because it have been likened to the grief process. Job loss is likened to the grief process. And so people go through those stages of grief. And if they're not getting support, then that can have a negative impact when they've left an organisation. And not only that, there's the people that are left behind who also are impacted emotionally as well. And they call it survivor syndrome, where those people, they've seen colleagues that they've worked with for years and years and years, they've formed close bonds and relationships with, they've exited, and if it hasn't been handled well, it does have an impact on those that are left behind as well. So I do think organisations do need to be mindful of the psychological and emotional aspects of redundancy and restructuring.
I want to come back to that, because I think whether, you're the one who's left behind, or the phases that we all go through when we're being made redundant. Certainly I've been through that myself. But what I'd really like to kind of drill down a little bit is what stops, or why, or not, maybe not what stops, but why don't organizations learn a lesson from their past experience,
Good question. Good question. I was speaking to somebody recently whose organisation is going through a restructure, and their job was affected. And the way that the organisation went about it, and I think, well, they've gone through so many restructurings before. Haven't they learned anything? So what they did was, so they started off at the top there. People have got to apply for their job. So they've created these positions, and people have got to reapply for these positions. And so the person I was speaking to, so she was one level below the very top. And so her manager was unsuccessful. There was quite a lot of her manager's peers that were unsuccessful as well. But yet they still got to manage the process of going through the next layers down. And so then you've got you have a lot of disengaged people who have not been successful in securing a new role in the new organisation going forward, but yet they're expected to still perform and deliver and manage the process of everybody else. So the person that I was speaking to, they have been unsuccessful in securing a role, and so now they're going to have to go onto the redeployment register, but they still got to carry on doing their job until the whole structure is sorted out. And so to me, I think, well, don't they learn? Because now you're going to have a lot of disengaged people who have probably already exited the organisation mentally, expected to deliver and under those conditions.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying is people are they're checked out, haven't they? And then
Yeah.
this is hard for me. And I guess what I want to zone into is the whole thing around, and how do you think this impacts on people who are introverted and also from the global majority?
Yeah. So I think the impacts that it can have are particularly when it comes to thinking about new roles and the opportunities, particularly when it comes to utilizing networks in order to do that, things around visibility and self-promotion, which when it comes to networks, historically, people from the global majority may not have had those networks that their counterparts have had, because of not being given access or not having had access to those types of networks. And when it comes to opportunities, a lot of opportunities come about through through networks. And so if you're not someone who has had access to certain networks, and then you're suddenly in a position where you've no longer got a job, it can be then difficult to utilize networks that you haven't, because you haven't got them. The other thing around visibility and promotion, particularly with regard to people who are introverted, introverts are typically, and I don't want to put people in boxes, but typically introverts aren't bothered about being in the spotlight. And the research does show that extroverts get more opportunities in the workplace because their performance is more visible, because they're more likely to talk up about their successes, their achievements, and what they're working on. Whereas introverts are more likely just to get on with it, do a fantastic job, but not necessarily be telling other people about it. So I think those things can become a challenge where somebody finds themselves without a job, and they've now got to navigate that process of getting a job and all that entails. And particularly if they've been in a role for a long length of time, they may not have had to do any of that externally.
I guess the other thing that makes me think about this, Carol, is building on the network, is that sponsorship. So, there are people within organizations who become good sponsors for you. And I guess if you're not networking, if you're not kind of connecting with that power that be, that can limitate your where you navigate to, I guess.
Yeah, and that's it. And it's not just about having the sponsors within your organization, it's having people who are in positions of influence and decision makers as part of your external network as well, so that they can be sponsors for you if you find yourself in a position where your job has been made redundant, that you have that network of people who could be sponsors for you, that could champion you and open doors of opportunity for you.
Yeah, I do think so. Now, we touched on sort of cost-cutting exercises and the introduction of AI, which I think, we have to all get used to it in some ways. It's not going to disappear like the internet, way back in the early 90s. And I went, oh, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
So, in terms of as an introverted individual, we've talked a little bit about the challenges. And if we kind of expand it to generational and gender differences, what's your thoughts on that? What are some of the challenges related to those maybe groups of people?
Yeah, so if you look at generational, I'll take generational first and then I'll take gender. So if you look at generational, well, I mean, I'm not sure exactly on the data for this, but when I look at people who are getting made or whose jobs are being made redundant, I'm seeing a lot of people who are, say, in their 50s plus, who are losing jobs and are finding it harder to get something else because of their age. I mean, I know we've got legislation in place to, but we all know that, yeah. And so for them, that particular demographic, it then becomes much harder because they're competing with a younger workforce. And the same does apply at the other end of the scale for people who are just starting out in their careers or in their very early careers and are trying to enter the workplace or just entered the workplace. If an organization operates on the last in, first out basis, then those are the ones that will be affected. And so for them, not having had that years of experience behind them, it then makes it difficult for them to get something else. But I mainly see, I mean, whilst I see that happening in that demographic, I mainly see it with the 50 plus age group who then find it challenging to get, they've maybe got to quite a senior position. And so then when it comes to getting something else, they're not able to get anything at the level that they were at or the salaries that they were at. And then when it comes to going for more junior positions or less paid positions, they're being told, well, they've got too much experience, or that they're going for something which then is making people think, well, because of what their experience and what they've gained and what they've done before, they're not going to stick around.
Yeah. I think it's such a shame, that we have these sort of invisible barriers, of, an individual who are in their 50s are going, they've probably got another 15 years that they can offer. Yet I guess it's what we're talking about is bias and people who are making the decision. And if someone in the 50s wants to apply for something that is they're overqualified for, well, that's a choice they're making, rather than individuals saying, well, you're overqualified. Well, if I can do the job, why not let me do it?
That's right, yeah. And that is right. So somebody may want to take a step back at this stage of their life and not do something which is as requires as much demands as what they have done previously. So they may want to take a job which is requires less qualifications to what they used to, or is a more junior position to what they used to, because of where they're at this stage of their life. And as you said, people are expected to earn off the state pension age in the UK is 67. And, that's probably going to increase even more over the coming years. So people have still got quite a long time ahead of them to be working.
Mm. And then we get into the intersectionality, don't we? Of you might be somebody from the global majority and you happen to be a woman as well. So,
Yeah.
I wonder what your thoughts are around that, the impact to that kind of intersectionality.
Yeah, and I think for women, I think it ties in as well to what I was saying about networks. Um, the research does show that men are better at utilizing their networks than women are. Um, oftentimes women have been excluded from particular networks basically because of their responsibilities. Women are still very much the main carers when it comes to children and elderly parents. And a lot of this talk about opportunities and so forth that goes on, it kind of excludes many women because of the times and the locations where they exist. So I think there's that impact that women have who are going through job loss.
Mm. Before we kind of look at what maybe strategies that we can or tips we can give them, I want to kind of go back to the process of redundancy that we touched on earlier on and the impact psychologically it can have on people who stay and obviously people who leave. And sometimes, I know from my own experience, I needed that push to get out. And yeah, others, for them, they want to stay within the organization. So let's look at, the people who may be being exited out. What kind of impact could they be having? You touched on it being a part of the grieving process.
Yeah.
What could somebody, uh, learn to manage for themselves as they're exiting an organization?
Yeah. So I'd say to recognize that what they're going through is a form of loss, it's a form of grief, and to recognize the different stages. When we go through the grief process, initially there's the denial, then there's the anger, then there's bargaining, and then there's depression before you get to the place of acceptance. So recognizing where they may be on that process, and it may be that they go up and down before they get to a place of acceptance. And I think for me, in terms of like my research and the work that I've done, it's initially recognizing that this is a situation that is out of your control.
Yeah.
And because the thing is, it can feel, when you're going through this, it can feel like it's a threat to your sense of personal security. And because you don't know what's around the corner, it brings on that fear of, I'm not going to survive. Even though you may not be recognizing it as that, but that's what it boils down to, is that fear of survival. And I'll give you an example. I had a coaching client who was a leader in an organisation, and the organisation was restructuring. There were 5 of them at that level, and they were going to reduce to 2 positions. I think it was 2 positions or 3, and which would mean that there would be some people that would be unsuccessful, and their roles would be made redundant. And when she came to coaching, she was having sleepless nights. She was stressed. She was getting dry scalp and flaky scalp and dry patches on her skin, which were the physiological symptoms of the stress that she was experiencing. And so I asked her what was going on for her, and she said, she thought she was going to end up homeless. And I could see that that was quite an irrational way of thinking, but that's what she truly believed. And I asked her, well, what makes you think that? And she said, well, she would be unsuccessful at the interview. She wouldn't get the job. And then her role she'd be made redundant. She wouldn't be able to pay her mortgage. Her house would be repossessed. She'd end up homeless. And so I said to her, okay, well, just supposing the worst came to the worst and you were unsuccessful at interview and your role was made redundant, what could you do? And she thought about it and she said, well, I guess I've got years of experience. I've got all these skills that I've gained over the years. I guess I could get something else. And then I asked her, well, supposing it take a long time to get something else, what could you do? And she said, well, I guess I could rent out a spare bedroom. I don't want to have to do that, but if the worst came to the worst, at least it would mean that I could continue to pay my mortgage. And that's when things shifted for her. And it was like a weight off her shoulders. And she realized that she had options and she was going to be okay. And so she went for the interview and she was successful. And she came back to me after and she said, Carol, people kept saying to me, oh, don't worry, you're really good at what you do. You're going to nail that interview. You've got no problem. But she said that just made her feel worse. And she asked me why that was. And I said it was because she didn't believe that she was going to be okay. It was once she recognized what her options were, realized that she was going to be okay, that was when she felt that she was going to be okay. And with that, once she believed she was going to be okay, that helped to remove the anxiety and the stress that she was experiencing. So she went into that interview more calmly and feeling more confident.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure our listeners who are listening to this recognize that you can almost run away with yourself and your saboteurs and close down options for
That's right.
ourselves,
Yeah.
and not feel, we're resourceful. We can thrive within that context, which may not be perfect, but we can do that.
That's
And
right. And I'll give you an example from my situation. So 15 years ago, I took redundancy from the job, an organisation that I'd worked in for since I was a teenager. And but I was clear about what I wanted to do because I'd thought about it. At the time, I thought that I would stay in that organisation till I retired and got the golden clock. But when I realised that my role was going to be deleted, and I could be redeployed into a different part of the organisation, I started thinking about, well, I wanted to be in control of my career. I didn't want to just be placed somewhere where I didn't necessarily want to be. And so then that's when I thought about, well, if I was to do something different, what could I do? And so I started to think about, well, what could I do? And I looked back over my career, what I'd loved and what I enjoyed over the years. And coaching had always been an add-on to what I did as a leader. And that was something that I really enjoyed doing. So I decided that I was going to take redundancy and did a master's in coaching psychology and start my coaching business. And I left feeling quite clear about what I wanted and hopeful. Whereas a colleague of mine didn't know what they were going to do. They were worrying, they were stressed, having sleepless nights about it because they had no clue about what they could do if they were to lose their job.
Yeah, and I'm as you're saying, is that we can respond to the same experience in a different way, and we can either ask ourselves those hard questions and still be, be on a wobbly place, or we can immerse ourselves in that wobbly place and not look outside of what's possible for me. And I guess what it also makes me think, that sometimes a redundancy, as you're describing, you were sort of saying you didn't want to be put in another role. An individual may choose to be put in another role and be wholly unhappy because they value the security of being in a job. And I personally think that's a bit sad, because if they did some thinking, well, did I really want that? I mean, even if they made that choice, did they really give themselves the option of thinking, do I really want that? Like you did, started looking. And I wonder whether sometimes we go for safety and security rather than, okay, let me ask those hard questions. Let me think about, what do I want my life to look like? And I know that's a very individual thing as well, because we feel the pressure of mortgages, children, partners, and lifestyle as well. Really.
And that is so true. Sometimes it's easier to go for what's comfortable and easy, than to face the unknown and not know. But what I would say is, these days in particular, there is no job that is secure.
No, I completely agree with you on that one. I think there isn't, when I first started working, you're right, you could get that golden clock.
Yeah.
Oh, no more anymore. It doesn't exist. To that end, one of the things I'm curious about from your research and experience, Carol, is what can organization do better when it comes to redundancies, do you think? What message would you want to send them as somebody who's worked in this area?
So I would say, so first of all, to be clear and open with people about what's happening, because oftentimes organizations don't communicate what is going on. And then what happens is, people, in the absence of communication, people develop their own ideas, and then the gossip mill starts going and people talk about this is happening. So be clear about what's happening. People would rather know that their jobs are being affected rather than not knowing and trying to figure it out for themselves. So be open about it. I know there may be things because of legal reasons and sensitivities, you may not be able to let them know everything, but be as open and honest as you can with communicating with your teams about what is happening at each stage. The other thing is being aware of not just the legal aspects of when it comes to making jobs redundant, but also the psychological impacts and what this has on your team. You have a duty of care for your team members. Just because they're no longer going to be working for you doesn't mean that you discharge that duty of care as a responsible employer. And so it's supporting them through that process. And that support can take on many different forms. And, some organizations provide outplacement support by way of, providing training, coaching, help with CV writing, and so forth. Some organizations may not have the budgets for that. But, I do think that providing some support and looking at how you can provide that support, you can be quite creative in how you provide that support. So if you can't afford one-to-one coaching for your team members, do groups. That's a more cost-effective way of supporting them through. But recognizing that if you're laying people off, they are going to go through a process. They're going to go through that grief process. One, you've got to think about the impact that it will have between when they're aware of this to them exiting the organization, and how that's going to impact their engagement and their performance, but also how that be a caring employer and think about them beyond that, because that will reap dividends for you in the long run.
I'm 100% around you. And I guess it also leads me to think something that you said earlier on, treating people as humans as well. So, they're not a number, or they're not somebody who's, a part of the organization in a certain context. They're human beings who, and I guess we tend to not remember that, along with all the things you're saying around communication and so forth. And so when it comes to sort of introverted leaders, and particularly people from global majority or women, or with other maybe with other intersectionality, what would be some of your 3 top tips, do you think, Carol?
Right. So my 3 top tips would be to like help that identify what will help you to get to that place of acceptance. So thinking about the stages of grief, identifying where you're at, what do you need, what will help you to get to that place of acceptance. And so it could be looking at what your options are, exploring what your options are, what are the what if this was to happen, what could you do? And just exploring all what possibilities are there available to you. Um, get the support that you need, whether it's coaching, whether it's help with redoing your CV or your LinkedIn profile. Look at what support you need and tap into that. And with that support as well comes your network. So making use of your network. And the third thing I would suggest is about, you may not like it, but is about that self-promotion and being visible. But rather than looking at it as self-promotion and being visible because that feels uncomfortable, just look at it as you're letting people know about the value that you add and the difference that you make. So when you're looking for roles, letting people see your expertise, don't undersell yourself, utilize LinkedIn as well as a way of being visible and letting people see your knowledge and expertise. So
Yeah.
that's my 3 top tips.
Yeah, great. It sounds, good practical tips as well. So usually when I round off my podcast, I always like to ask my guest, what's the sort of a motto that they probably connect with the most, that they live by, really?
What do I live by? I would say it's probably a scripture, and it's, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Wow. Great.
Mhm.
That's a good one to remember when you're in a wobbly period, aren't you?
Mhm. Yeah.
There's a lot of power in that. Carol, thank you very much for your time and your expertise in this area. I found it very reinforcing and insightful in terms of the impact that redundancy can have on introverted leaders and other individuals in our complex, volatile world.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.